Well, I've got two things in my mind, and they're both in the middle of the car. I did say I'm kind of working from the back to the front, but this is in the middle. Now I've got two things. I've got this, and the other thing is the gear shift. Now, so I don't know if you can see, this is my steering obviously, and it would be nice to have the handbrake here or something, wouldn't it? But no, it's back here. Now, not disastrously out of position, but it would be better if it was here. Right, all being well, this will be my gear lever, and it needs to have an M10 thread on, well, probably both ends of it actually, although you can probably tell this piece of rod is actually a bit on the long side. But let's start here anyway. Okay, get in there. And because the very end of this was a bit too thin actually, I'm going to finish up cutting the end off, just the very end. But that means I need to cut it a bit deeper thread than I might have done. But it's cutting quite nicely now, thank you. I'm far from an expert in such techniques, but winding round, backing off a bit and then trying again or going again. Funnily enough, I remember from school when I was about 12, sometime in the 1970s. I'll use the poor man's lathe. And there we go. So, I just need my joint and knob to turn up. But I probably can set about thread in the other end, because I can work out pretty much how long I need it to be. Right, I've measured my gear lever, and it's a pity my joint hasn't turned up, but by the look of it, it's a bit of an approximation. By the look of it, I can actually cut this piece of rod in half. It's way too long. It may be proved to be less than half, is fine. But I'm just trying to get this project started. So here we are. I'm going to cut the rod in half, and then we'll see about getting it the right thickness. Now, using my poor man's lathe again, because although I thought this rod was 10 millimeters, I suspect it's, well, I mean, I measured it, it seems to be about 11, which is too thick for a 10 millimeter die. So I'm going to have to make it a bit thinner. And this is my poor man's lathe setup. And there we are. And obviously this is a gear lever, it's not a precision cut for a piece of engine or something. So hopefully that'll be fine. So bit of grease. Let's see if I can get it started. That was the most difficult stage, was just getting the thing started. Right, that was relatively hard work. There we go. It can be shortened a little bit if necessary, and I think there may be, or should be, room for a lock nut as well. So yeah, quite pleased with that. After looking carefully at the gear lever and where the swivel point, in fact I can do this while you're looking. There's a little bit by eye but there's a bit more science to it than that, actually. Ugh. It's a pity I haven't got all of the parts that I need yet, so yeah, I'm probably getting a bit too far ahead of myself in some respects, but I'm wanting to mimic the movement of this, obviously the actual gear lever, on a jointed thing that's up here somewhere. So I've approximated by eye the position of the swivel as being, well, I think it's probably around this position. Obviously it's a great big round thing, so this is just an approximation. While I'm at it, I might as well go into all this. Now this, there's 3 little screws on the top. This little dish thing is the reverse detent. There's a rubber washer around it. As you see, oh, you know what, I was wrong. The gear lever does come out. Well, well, well. I'm sure I've taken that out before and it hadn't come off. Alright, so I can actually see the position of the ball. The ball is kind of, the centre of the ball is roughly where that peg is. So from the bottom of the rubbery mounting bit is about that much. Shall I do some proper science here? Where's my ruler? Right, so from the centre of that swivel ball to the bottom of the shroud is 5.5 centimetres. So put that back in then. Right, that was a bit of a fiddle. Right. So from the bottom of the rubber shroudy bit to the swivel point, I measured as 5.5 centimetres. Now I got that as 6. So yeah, actually I wasn't far out. So the swivel point is just there. So let's draw a little target around it to avoid confusion. So that should be my target for the swivel point on the remote. This height above that level of the gearbox, but obviously further that way. So if you add on an imaginary rose joint, say at about that height, and then imagine a tab coming up a bit higher to intersect with the inner part of the gear lever, then you end up, should I say, with that position for my tab. So in fact I was about right. So now then I need to weld a piece of what I'm calling a tab onto the lever, on the side of the lever. I'm not going to attempt to drill through the lever because that's just an unnecessary complication. It needs to go on basically like that. Right, there we go. Got a couple of 1mm washers which will place this 8mm bar in the middle of this 10mm rod. Do you see where I'm going? So I'm going to weld that, and luckily because this is curved and that's straight, it means I don't have to bevel the edges, I can just go in there. So let's see if I can get a weld onto that. Right, a pretty high current I think for this. Okay, I found a bit of stuff. Unfortunately I've only got one piece like it, but it will do for an experimento. Or maybe even the final thing. So it's surgery time on the real gear lever. Of course the real gear lever is in two parts. There's the internal shaft and then this rubbery mounted thing with a slight wiggle on top, but it's going to have to come off. Right, so that's the rubbery bit gone, and we are left with the real gear lever. Now this is the reverse interlock, so that gives the alignment. Okay, so that's the original gear lever inner, as it were. Obviously I've got this all level, and I've got the reverse interlock tab is at 90 degrees upwards. This is all done by eyeballing. Okay then, and again I ask you to imagine there being a rose joint on the end of this. So this is, as it were, longer than it appears to be, but basically it's this. So I was thinking about this with the pivot points both on the inside of the shaft, thinking that that was wrong, because to keep the equal length between the pivot points and the these pivot points, they would both have to be on the same side. So this one would have to be like that, would have to be over there. But then I realised that that's not true, because it depends on how the bottom of the pivots is actually fitted as well. So it's certainly neater to have the tabs on the inside so they don't stick out. In that case I'm going to need to have a look to see where the rose joint, when it comes, is actually going to be mounted. Is it here, is it here, is it here, whatever. So I'm going to have a look at that. Okay, let's put that back where it was a second ago. And that's how it looks underneath. You know what, that's pretty close. Okay then, back to my gear lever. And this is my rose joint, which is going to be the bottom end of the remote gear lever. Now, I have had some small concerns as to whether, because it's left and right, whether there's enough angle there. I think there may be, to be honest, but just in case, I've got these things, I think they're called top hats or something. I'm not exactly sure why they're called that, but they allow for maximum angle by reducing the size of the bolt that goes through the middle. So this is an M10 rose joint, but it's designed to use these things with an M8. So that's what I'm intending to use. So I just need to get some bracketry to make that go on the bottom of the gear lever. Now, I'm going to have to take the mounting plate out before I can do that, so back in a moment. So here is the arrangement. Obviously this is a pivot, and that's what enables this to happen. But I'm just conscious that this is clearly higher up than this end. So that's actually increasing the angle that needs to be... that's not true actually, it's decreasing it. Anyway, I want it to be parallel. So I'm going to have to take this, this is threaded on as far as it will go at the moment. It's a little bit taller. How much taller is it? Okay, so from the pivot point, which I measured before, to the centre of the operating is 7, and Here we have, looks like pretty much 10. Yeah, so I'll need to probably get rid of all that exposed thread, certainly a lot of it, and just bring it back down, which will make the whole lever a little bit shorter. It's perfectly okay, but anyway, small details, and I think, yeah, I'll just cut some of the thread off. Okay then, so I've cut off basically the spare thread there, and the operating arm is pretty much horizontal. Obviously I need to decide exactly where it's mounted down here, which is the next thing I need to do. Now, one of the points is that this plate that I've made going onto the gearbox, did I explain this before? The plate going onto the gearbox, gear lever mounting there, and it needs to be finalised down here actually, but anyway, the point is it will be here, but this plate would be quite useful if I could take it out. Now clearly I'm looking for vertical standoffs to mount this thing from, but if I mount that permanently on there, it's going to be difficult to get out, in and out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount my vertical standoffs on a separate piece, and the separate piece will be mounted to that via some small bolts. And yeah, here's my piece of metal that I've chosen for that. So it will be something like that. So I can now work on this piece out of the car, which is kind of handy. So I shall just put my vertical standoffs on there. So obviously I need to weld those on. Okay, so I put a slight twist in the bar there, and that enables this thing to go flat. And the reason why that was necessary was because of the limitations of the angle from the rose joint. So there's only a certain amount of displacement this way that it can actually do, but that slight twist enables it to stay within its limits. Okay, so I'm sitting in the driver's seat, and this is how it is. And I'm now seeing that actually having a separate plate for the standoffs, separate from the brake itself at this point, is quite helpful, because you can nuance it like this according to how you want the gear lever. But in my case I think I'm going to have it just there, and I'm going to fix it by two bolts there and there. Then there'll be perhaps a third one up here, but of course, since this bracket's in two pieces, I do need to finalise needs to be some spacers in there. But my feeling is that right now, as I speak, that's certainly good enough to be going on with. So I'll just do that. I'll just drill a couple of holes. I think I'm going to tap this to be M6 rather than trying to put a bolt or a nut under it. So here we are then. Needs some, let's call it polishing, but not bad. Wish I'd knob, but anyway, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and reverse. So here it is, complete with the cover on. Obviously I've got some holes to deal with, some sort of gaiter, what have you, but there we are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and reverse. Reverse detent I have an idea for, but it's fairly trivial really when I can just do that. I think there may be a cable thing. Sunshine. Anyway, I've been finessing my gear lever system, and there's a few elements to that. One of which is I have a gear knob, which is nice. I've also splashed some paint on it just to keep the rust off really. I've also put a lock nut. Yes, I didn't want the rose joint to be twisting round because that restricted its movement, so I put a lock nut. I had to thread a little bit more of the shaft in order to do that. Another thing I did was I put a big flat washer. I was trying to avoid any sense of movement sideways in that joint, and that meant tightening up just the right amount to stop it from binding. There's quite a bit of grease gone in there, and it was the same at the other end. There's my front plate. Now, I mentioned that because of my chassis rail here, it was difficult to get the thing in one piece. So that's why I did it in two pieces, although it does have the benefit of meaning that you don't need to make the measurements from here to here quite so precise. So this is what I shall call the front piece as opposed to the under piece, and it is designed to go onto these gearbox bolts, which hold the two halves of the gearbox together by the look of it. But I don't know whether you can see this. This one here is set forward more than this one here, and that's the reason I've got these three washers in there to allow the thing to tighten up, because there's a kind of shaped bit here. Who knows what the exact reason for that is, but anyway, that's why I've done that. A little bit of an irritant is the fact that you can't unscrew this bolt completely without taking what I assume is the reversing light switch out, which screws in that hole. It's going to be a little bit of a fiddle to get this back together again, because I'm going to have to screw this back in with the plate attached. This is another reason, I think, why putting it in two pieces could be advantageous, because that's relatively easy to deal with than a continuous piece going from here to here. But anyway, yeah. So what size is this? And of course you can't get a ring spanner on it. You can't get a socket on it because there's not enough space when the gearbox is in anyway, not enough space to get one on. I did try. So I've had to buy a spanner, and it's 27mm. So yeah, that's a kind of what was that, £6 or £7 for that, and that helped me or allow me to put that reversing light in place, which will have to happen after these bolts have been tightened up on this plate. And when that's happened, I can put this is the front plate, I'll put the top plate back on. So it's a slightly unusual shape, so let me point. So this side is higher up. This is, I should look at it that way around really. That side is lower down than this side, and also this side needs the spacers to make the bolt actually move this direction. So it's asymmetric, designed by, frankly, trial and error, cutting a bit, cutting a bit, cutting a bit, until I managed to get it to go together, and then eventually eventually, indeed, it goes together, and that's the important thing. So I'll have to paint that before I tighten it up finally. Then I shall put the reversing light back in. Then I shall put the underplate, which goes under this chassis member and joins from there to there. And then when that's all in place, the actual lever assembly itself can go on and should operate as you saw before. So it'd be quite good to actually get the use of that with a knob, which it didn't have last time. And yeah, getting it a little bit more finalised. This is my remote select shaft thing, which basically is a fork. I've seen another design which basically is two entirely separate plates. Yeah, that would definitely work as well, but I can't help but think having a connection from this side to this side is actually a good idea. A fork was more convenient for me due to the bits and pieces I had lying around. Again, this plate being separate from the underplate and therefore bolts on, that's upside down, but bolts on here. That was more convenient because it meant I could feed the actual lever assembly through the chassis more easily. So other applications your mileage may vary, I believe is the term to use on that. But it is surprising that this, if you like, is the original gear lever here, and it does actually, for example, rock from side to side as you waggle the gear lever, and that is achieved by the stiffness, the torsional stiffness of this remote bar thing, which I did actually twist. You might be able to see in the picture, because it appeared to make the lever go surprisingly far this way even when it was just in neutral at rest. I'm not quite sure why that was, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it's just an adjustment you can have. Another way of achieving the same thing, oh yeah, because I'm using a rose joint in here, you can't see it properly because it's got some paint overspray. Because I'm using a rose joint in here to provide the forward and a little bit of forward and back, sorry, and left and right movement. We don't want any twist. So this has actually got some limits on the amount of movement side to side. So these are top hat large offset, I think they're called, spacers, were actually very useful. But to correct if you have not enough movement available. Anyway, I think it will do for the time being, that's for sure. No doubt in operation there will be some details that will no doubt be irritating, but I'm quite pleased with it. I mean, I was pleased with it before, and I'm now going to be even more pleased with it, because things have been tightened up and painted and so on. I just need to make sure I can get that lever system through those holes. This has got a huge hole. This because it's obviously that tower, which is the original gear linkage. I wish it wasn't so big, but it is, and I can't think of a way of eliminating it. So, having put some paint on my odd-shaped bracket, I need to put it back in place. Obviously, these are some of the main gearbox assembling bolts. and so yeah, they need to be done up properly. And because these are not complete holes, they're forks really, I've put some extra washers on simply to kind of spread the load out, especially as the bolts go on. And this is an area whereby I'm making virtually out of necessity, if you like, because this 2-part bracket need not have been 2 parts, except for the fact of the way I've got my chassis with this tube, especially that one going over in the way. But I think it also makes it slightly easier to make the bracket. Because the detail of how far it is from here to here is now kind of adjustable. Right, so I have a threaded hole in here now, and while I'm at it, I shall put the reversing light switch back in again. I'll just put you in here to show how close these things are to each other. So that's my bracket mounting gearbox bolt thing, and that there is the reversing light switch. So difficult to show you, but as you can see they're very close together. The reversing light itself is that big, so I've just had to take one of my washers out. So in the end I had to cut away some of the bracket here, so it made it possible to get the reversing light switch back in, and also the connecting bolt there, which was very close together. So anyway, there we are. The gear lever's fixed down. The joining bolt is threaded through this and this into this. There is no nut underneath. The gear lever does most of the load. There isn't a lot of load really, to be honest. It's just front to back, I would say. But yeah, what I need to do now is simply to sit in it and show how it goes. So mostly painted, apart from I had to trim the side off that, but this is it really. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and reverse. Now you'll notice I had to do something weird, which I've got to sort out. Some ideas, but ignoring that for a second, that is pretty decent. Can you see the action? And okay, so that's reverse, and what can I say about it before going into that? So there's 3 plates involved. What I'm calling the lower plate, which goes onto the gear lever tower, and also the front piece that joins onto it, which goes onto the front section, and then the actual gear lever pivot, which takes the rose joint at the base of the gear lever itself. And considering, I don't know what the mileage on this box is, but it's pretty good. I'll try to take out as much slack as possible with careful adjustment of the tension of these bolts here, with washers and greasing and so on, to stop any sort of twisting. But I reckon that's pretty good actually. So I also put this lock nut on the base of the gear lever shaft in order to prevent the rose joint down here from twisting, because it is kind of the limit of its or getting towards the limit of its travel. That could actually reduce it if you're not careful. So the top hat spacer things were in fact an extremely good idea, but it means above all, I should say, that yeah, steering wheel here, gear lever here, and I don't think you can say fairer than that. Oh, you've caught me at it. Pulling the whole thing through together. Never done this before. I think I might have to take the knob off. Oh, there's a lot of thread on there. Okay, can I feed that all through at the same time? Yes. I'm just going to re-record that piece, that section with the lid on. So you've just seen me put the whole assembly on with the cover on the tunnel. Of course, doesn't change anything. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and reverse. So I need to find a gaiter to go around that. So that shouldn't affect anything. Obviously need to build some kind of structure around this to make it look nicer. By the way, this thing could have been extended longer. I could have had the gear lever forward or back. In fact, this whole mechanism would have worked the other way around. And I would just say that I think I said before, by careful use of washers and so on, trying to minimise the amount of free play in that connection and this one. But also one of my reasonings by having this large 8mm tab welded to the original gear lever stub there and indeed there was to provide a larger wearing surface, and certainly didn't want to drill through the gear lever shaft itself, which is probably hard and probably difficult and wouldn't offer much wearing surface, whereas this is kind of a square inch ready. So that's the reasoning of that. The whole system could have been flipped the other way around to move the gear lever backwards if you wanted to. Obviously this tab would probably need to be on the other side if you did that, but actually the lever itself wouldn't be affected because you can just turn it round. So the principle is definitely there, and the length can be adjusted by the length of this thing here. I think that's at 4mm, 5mm possibly. There's no sign of any bending there at all. So yeah, other little slight nuances of what is left of this little mini project or sub project. Sorry, this is the word I'm using. Sub project is the dashboard. So I've got the tunnel cover here. Yeah, due to the way the cover of the tunnel is and where the bottom of the dashboard is, I think I'm going to have to cut the dashboard, the tunnel cover, and have a join in it round about there. Otherwise I shall have to take the dashboard out and I'll get the tunnel cover off. But yeah, I would say that this sub project, for now anyway, is over. Pretty successful, I think it is too. So, what of next time? Well, I've got plumbing to do, not just this, but also all the way from the brake master cylinder to the back axle. So that's a fairly major item. As I mentioned, I may cut this part here so I can take the tunnel cover off without taking the dashboard out. I haven't yet decided on instruments, which is why the dashboard's looking rather blank at the moment. That's work in progress, me thinking and spending wise, in fact. So yeah, that'll be enough to keep us going, and that's even before I get around to looking at the engine.